Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/Nerdery and Murdery. That's audibletrial.com/Nerdery and Murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/Nerdery and Murdery. That's betterhelp.com/Nerdery and Murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
What's in the box? What's in the box?
Welcome to episode 113 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 113. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of highs and lows and ups and the downs, the good and the bad. And Zig, what have you been up to?
Mostly working. Doing some notes. I've been doing a lot of research on film recently, so we've got a big slate of episodes with film in it. Just basically watching old movies and writing up notes, things of that nature.
Yeah.
How about you? How's it going down in Groove Town?
Down in the valley, it's hot. Been golfing a lot though.
How's that going?
It's fun. I suck at it. My drives are getting better though.
That's good.
I got to figure out my short game. I get some really good first shots and then I just blow it. So I got to get better with my irons and my wedges and figure out how to hit those right. So,
Your putting's okay though, right?
No, not really. No, my short game sucks. So it's a hard game. It's very difficult to master. That's for sure. A lot harder than I thought it was going to be, but it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. I haven't played a full 18 yet. I've only played 9 holes. But I play almost every day. Chelsea and her parents are out golfing right now, so I'll miss it today.
Sorry, man.
That's all right. That's all right. Can't golf tomorrow because the club's closed. So, oh well. but yeah, that's about it. I mean, I've been working too, and just acclimating to new life down here. We do have a coming up in October, in not too far away in Hidalgo. They're doing a anniversary Rocky Horror Picture Show, and Brad Majors will be there.
Nice. We've got one coming up here too. The K3 is working at the movie theater up here, so we're going to do it there as well. But we're not going to have Barry Bostwick.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised he's going to be all the way down here. I mean, surely that's a tour or something.
Yeah, it's got to be.
So I don't know. So I may try to go to that. It's not a midnight showing. I think it's on a Sunday night. I think it's at 8:00 if I remember right. So I might try to go to it.
Nice. That sounds like fun.
We'll see. But yeah, that's all. That's really kind of all about all I have. So Zig, why don't you take over on the nerdery side of the house?
Awesome. So I've been wanting to talk about film noir for a long time, but my problem is there's a lot of film noir out there.
Right.
And I wanted to pick 5 examples that people may not necessarily know of or even realize are film noir. So I basically wanted to talk about this. A film noir is basically detective stories from the 1940s and 50s, where the hard-boiled detective basically gets beaten up a lot. Yep. And in a lot of cases, whatever they're doing has no actual bearing on the story. They're basically a patsy for most of it. A lot. Film noir is actually a French term about an American type of movie. It's primarily used to describe stylish Hollywood crime dramas, particularly those that emphasize cynical attitudes and motivations. The 40s and the 50s are generally regarded as the classic period of American film noir. This era is associated with a low-key black and white visual style that has roots in German expressionist cinematography.
Wow.
Yeah, many of the prototype stories and much of the attitudes of classic noir derive from hard-boiled schools of crime fiction that emerged in the United States during the Great Depression. The term film noir means dark film. It was first applied to Hollywood films by French critic Nino Frank in 1946, but it was unrecognized by most American film industry professionals of the era. Frank is believed to have been inspired by the French literary publishing imprint Sierra Noir, founded in 1945. Cinema historians and critics define the category retrospectively. Before the notion was widely adopted in the 70s, many of the classic film noirs were referred to as melodramas. Whether film noir qualities are distinct genres or whether it's more of a filmmaking style is a matter of ongoing and heavy debate amongst scholars and film fans. If I ever met Quentin Tarantino, if I had a chance to meet Quentin Tarantino and could ask him a question, it would be, can you define film noir, and listen to him talk for 3 hours? That'd be it. That's what I would do. Film noir encompasses a range of plots that central figures may be a private investigator like The Big Sleep, or a plainclothes police officer like The Big Heat, an aging boxer, The Setup, a grifter, Night in the City, or a law-abiding citizen lured into a life of crime like Gun Crazy. Now, all of these are fine examples of film noir, but it's probably stuff that people have seen. So I wanted to stray away from The Big Sleep and The Big Heat, The Setup, and Gun Crazy, or DOA. Night in the City is another one. In 1946, American film noir psychological thriller. Well, let's talk about what we're going to do. Somewhere in the Night, M from Germany, Shaft, Seven, and Copland.
I'm surprised Pulp Fiction didn't make this list.
You know what? I debated on putting Pulp Fiction in this because it's pretty film noir.
Right.
But I kind of want to do Tarantino by himself. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I want to do Tarantino as Tarantino. Besides, these are some that maybe people don't realize what they are when they're watching them or have not heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
Copland may be one of the best films to come out in the late 90s, and nobody saw it. The cast is incredible. The reason nobody saw it is Sylvester Stallone plays this aging, drunk local sheriff in this little New Jersey town that's right across the river from New York City. And he put on like 50, 60 pounds to do it. He's deaf in one ear. I mean, when he needs some money, he will go up, since he's the town sheriff, he will go up to the parking meters and open them up and just grab money out of them. Just not a sympathetic character at all. I think that's why people didn't go see it, because, you know, they were down on Stallone not being a hero.
Mm-hmm.
He is kind of a hero, but he's also a slob. I personally think it's the best performance he's ever given of his life. And he's incredible in it. Anyway, so I want to start with Somewhere in the Night. This is a 1946 American film psychological thriller directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, Mankey's brother. The other Mankiewicz who wrote, who everybody refers to as Mankey, wrote Citizen Kane and several other things. He was an amazing writer and not really so much a director. But Mankey also couldn't get his life together. He had a strange affair with the bottle. Joseph, not as good of a writer and a director, but better than any of his contemporaries. It was written by Mankiewicz and Howard Dimmesdale and Lee Strasberg of the Strasberg Studio.
Mm-hmm.
From a short story by Marvin Borowski, it stars John Hodiak and Nancy Guild. The sporting cast features Lloyd Nolan, Richard Conte, Joseph Hutchinson, and Sheldon Leonard, and a really early role by Colonel Potter.
Oh,
yeah.
Harry Morgan.
Harry Morgan, yeah. In the final weeks of World War II, a bandaged rat man awakens with amnesia in a U.S. Army field hospital in Okinawa. Over the course of his recovery at a hospital in Hawaii, he learns that he is George Taylor, and he was severely wounded by an enemy grenade. Amongst Taylor's personal items is an unsigned letter that curses him for an unsuspected wrong he committed against the writer. Taylor decides to feign that he is in full possession of his memories and resolves to find out who he was. So the guy's real paranoid about, because they won't let him out of the hospital until he basically shows that he's cognitive. So he basically feigns that he knows who he is and where he's going. He goes to the little office that handles your personal goods, like a little mail office. I wasn't in the U.S. military, so I don't know what that's called.
Called just post office.
Yeah. Oh, okay, there you go, post office. So to get there, like, hey, you want us to send your sea bag back to your last known address? And he's like, no, I'll go ahead and take it, but where were you going to send it? Because I don't think you have the right one. So he gets the address that way. He's kind of paranoid, like he doesn't want people to realize that he's not in full control of his faculties. So he kind of obfuscates things. I just watched this yesterday, by the way. So again, so he gets back to LA, and he finds out he gets to LA, and there's a bus locker where he pays the guy to get his stuff out of hock. When he picks it up, there's a pistol and a letter from his friend Larry Cravette, who says, I've deposited $5,000 in your name at this local bank. Meet me at this bathhouse when you get back into town. We'll talk about it. So he puts the gun, or he stashes the gun in a bus locker and throws the key away. Takes the letter, goes to the bank, and they start asking him questions because it's 1945. He's got $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't even get the money. He gets The money he's got is what he got discharged from the Marines for, at the end of the war. He's getting phased out. And they gave those guys quite a bit of money after they got home. So he goes to the bathhouse, and they tell him, well, usually the guys who would come here, they come here, and then they go to a nightclub afterwards, and they come here to basically steam themselves out. This is where he meets Harry Morgan. So he goes to this nightclub and meets Larry Cravet's. He meets this woman whose best friend was Larry Cravet's fiance, but she's now living with some other dude. And the lady at the club, she's a singer. She basically takes pity on him because she's the only one he tells, I don't remember anything. I don't even know if my name is George Taylor. The ID they found in my pocket tells me that's my name. I assume that's true. I don't know. And then people start trying to track him down and beat him up for no reason because they keep asking him questions. He doesn't have any answers to it. It all links back to 1942. There was an explosion down on the docks at the port of Los Angeles. A guy died, and it had to do with some stolen Nazi gold. Because the Nazis, this small group of Nazis had figured out that Hitler was going to lose, so they tried to take this money and run away to America. Well, they got caught by basically a couple of private detectives, Larry Cravat and George Taylor. One of them got killed, and the other one stashed the money and went and joined the Marines because everybody was signing up, figuring at the end of the war he'd come back and pick up the bag. The guy who did that was Larry Cravat. The guy who got killed was George Taylor. Larry Cravat took on George Taylor's identity and went and joined the Marines. The only problem is, toward the end of the war, he gets taken out by a grenade that causes him to lose his memory temporarily. And when he tries to regain it as George Taylor, what he doesn't realize is he's not actually George Taylor. He's Larry Cravat. George Taylor's dead.
Very confusing.
Oh my God, it's amazing though. And you got all these hard-boiled detectives and people getting beat up, and it's amazing. It is amazing. They did a radio version of it that they broadcast in the Lux Radio Theater in March 3rd of 1947. That was just amazing. But it hits all the switches for film noir, because when the guy wakes up, his jaw's wired shut, so he can't talk. So it's all inner monologue for the first 5 minutes of the movie. And people will lean down to talk to him, and he's like, is that my name? Am I George Taylor? It's amazing. It's well shot. It's well lit. It's a film noir masterpiece, and one that I think everybody should see. As a matter of fact, it is in the public domain. Therefore, it is in our YouTube playlist in its entirety. It's the first movie. And it's a good, clean, solid copy that we have. It looks like they recorded it off of a digital copy.
Mm-hmm.
Right down to, I think there's some cigarette burns in it too, so you can tell where the real changes were.
Can't really call it a movie. It was only 45 minutes, but saw something the other night that was shot in black and white and had the cigarette burns.
Oh, nice. What was it called?
Werewolf in the Night.
Oh, wait, you saw Werewolf in the Night?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was okay. It wasn't as great as I was led to believe. I know it was covered on Two Geeks and a Microphone.
Yes.
And I enjoyed it enough. I don't know. I kind of felt it was a little rushed.
45 minutes. That's maybe a little too short to tell a story.
Yeah. I thought it was a little too short, but I thought it was good. It was enjoyable. Yeah,
I have yet to see the Werewolf in the Night yet, and I've got it. I don't know why I don't.
It's good. It was good. Where did I see it? I think I saw it on Hulu, and it's soon to be leaving Hulu. So.
Oh, yeah, I better go check that out. Okay. I'm on it. I may watch that today. The next film is M, which we have discussed before. It was based around the German serial killer. That's where they got the idea for M.
Yep.
It's a 1931 German mystery suspense thriller film directed by Fritz Lang, and it stars Peter Lorre in his third screen role as Hans Beckert, a serial killer of children. It is an early example of procedural drama. In the film centers the manhunt for Lorre's character, conducted by both police and the criminal underworld. The film's screenplay was written by Lang and his wife Thea von Harber, and was Lang's first sound film. So it is a sound movie. It's in German, so it's subtitles. I think there's some dubbed copies of it, but you don't really get Peter Lorre's voice. You think, because he went on to America after this. I don't know why they didn't just get him for the dubbing, because he was looking for roles. But it features a lot of the cinematic innovations, including the use of long fluid tracking shots and musical leitmotif in the form of in the Hall of the Mountain King, whistled by Lorre's character. It is considered a classic, and the film was deemed by Lang to be his greatest film, even better than Nosferatu. It is widely considered one of the greatest films of all time, an indispensable influence on modern crime and thriller fiction. Basically, in Berlin, a group of children are playing an elimination game in the courtyard of an apartment building using a chant about a murderer of children. A woman sets the table for lunch, waiting for her daughter to come home from school, and a wanted poster warns of a serial killer preying on children and anxious parents wait outside a school. The film climaxes with a chase up a bunch of flight of stairs with Peter Lorre. This is where I want to say film noir got its first foray. It feels like a 1940s film noir film, even though it's 1931 in Germany. He is running and running up these stairs, trying to get away from not only the cops, but the mob's out looking for him because they don't want anybody killing kids on their streets. You got angry parents chasing after him, and he's running up this building, and he is out of breath and trying to get away from these people. He is also a monster, but it's and the pains on his face, it is incredible. If for nothing else, and I think I've included it. If not, I'll go back and include it. The chase scene is film noir at its finest. The film is also referred to in the song "In Germany Before the War" by American songwriter Randy Newman in his 1977 album Little Criminals. The BBC ranked it number one of all time foreign language films. It's just that good. It played everywhere too. Of course, this is, when Berlin was still an artistic capital of the world before the Nazis took over. So it was brilliant, and it was new, and it was sleek, and it was something that no one had ever done before. So, M is one of those things you really need to get out and see. It is readily available in a lot of places. I haven't included some examples from M and some things where they talk about M and how it affected film noir 10 years later in America. But yeah, that's about it for M.
I was trying to remember the killer. Was it Fritz Harman?
Yes, it was
Fritz Harman. Okay, thank you.
Correct, Fritz Harman.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. The next film is Shaft. Shaft has been described as a blaxploitation crime action thriller film.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I disagree. I think it's more of a film noir movie because you get a lot of voiceovers from Shaft, his inner monologue going on, which is kind of a hallmark of film noir. And Gordon Parks directing in it is incredible. The film was directed by Gordon Parks and written by Ernest Tidyman and John D.F. Black. It is an adaptation of Tiedeman's novel of the same name and the first entry in the Shaft film series. The plot revolves around a private detective named John Shaft, who is hired by Harlem mobsters to rescue his daughter from the Italian mobsters who kidnapped her. This film stars Richard Roundtree as Shaft, who went on to do a bunch of these Shaft movies, alongside Moses Gunn, Charles Ciaffi, Christopher St. John, and Lawrence Pressman. The film explores themes including masculinity and sexuality, with a specific emphasis on Black power. It was filmed at Harlem, Greenwich Village, and Times Square within the Manhattan borough of New York City. The Shaft soundtrack album, recorded by Isaac Hayes, was also a successful winning Isaac Hayes a Grammy for Best Original Score written for a motion picture. And a second Grammy shared with Alan Best for Best Instrumental Arrangement for the theme from Shaft. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. The song has appeared on multiple top 100 lists, including AFI's 100 Years and 100 Songs, a prime example of blaxploitation genre. It was selected in 2000 for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. I agree, it is historically and significant, but for completely different reasons. Yes, it is a bit of a blaxploitation film. I would say less so than Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. When we get into blaxploitation, we're going to get in deep to blaxploitation. But I still say the first Shaft movie, not the rest of them. The rest of them were clearly blaxploitation. But the first Shaft movie is a film noir piece. You've got the inner monologue of Shaft. You've got him basically going through ranks of hustlers and ne'er-do-wells and dirty cops and mobsters and hookers and there's a lot of drinking, and he's just trying to stay on the straight and narrow, do the right thing for the right people and get paid. You go through, you got these black militant leaders who he runs afoul of, which is, classic film noir where the protagonist is not only running from the police, but also ne'er-do-wells, generally multiple groups of them. Shaft was adapted from the Tiedeman's novel by Tiedeman, and John Freeman executive produced and Serling Silfant. The screen detective genre in the late 60s have been dominated by the big movies and big stars like Paul Newman, and Frank Sinatra, and Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry stuff. But this was not that. This was something different. And I want to say, we didn't see film noir again until the mid to late 80s. It didn't come back. Where we got pictures like things like the Hat Squad and the one with Kevin Spacey.
Yeah. Which one with Kevin Spacey?
Okay, The Usual Suspects. Definitely. Yeah. The one that takes place in Hollywood in the 40s. There were two of those out at the same time.
Give me a minute and I'll find it.
Hollywood Confidential.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there was another one with Nick Nolte as well that basically followed the same course. I think they were even talking about the same process. These were real big in the 90s. But I want to say film noir kind of died out. Melvin Van Peebles claims that the success of his film, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, caused Shaft to be changed from a white movie into a black one. In fact, filming of Shaft began in 1971, several months before the release of Van Peebles' film, with Roundtree already confirmed in the lead role. The story is set in the same month as shown by a calendar on Shaft's office wall. So Tiedeman, who is white, was an editor of the New York Times prior to becoming a novelist. He sold the movie rights to Shaft by showing a gallery proofs to the studio that the novel had not yet been published. Tiedeman was honored by the NAACP for his work in the Shaft movies and book. But I would say I kind of agree with Mario Van Peebles that they kind of took some blaxploitation film elements and mixed them into Shaft as they were making it. But no, I think the original idea was they were going to make a film noir piece where the central character, the detective, was a black dude in Harlem. That was the original idea, and the blaxploitation things came later. And again, the other films after this definitely blaxploitation. I'll give you that 100%. But I want to say Shaft, at its heart, is a film noir piece with Richard Roundtree as this incredible hard-boiled detective who just takes on the world. Like, that hard-boiled detective is kind of like the cowboy in American culture. He's the rogue. He's the Han Solo, the desperado who's not quite a good guy, but not really a bad guy either. He plays by his own rules and he has his own moral code. Shaft, I think, fits that distinctly well. The next film I want to talk about is Seven. Seven is a 1995 American crime thriller film directed by David Fincher and written by Andrew Kevin Walker. It stars Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and John C. McGinley.
And Kevin Spacey.
Set in an unnamed crime-ridden city, Seven's plot follows disenchanted near-retirement detective William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, and his newly transferred partner, David Mills, as they attempt to stop a serial killer before he can complete a series of murders based on the 7 deadly sins. Now, the reason I included this as film noir is not because of Brad Pitt or Kevin Spacey. It's because of Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman is the hard-boiled detective near retirement and basically the lead in this film. But that gets buried because everybody assumes it's Kevin Spacey and Brad Pitt, and it's a force of will between Brad Pitt and Kevin Spacey, and it's not. It's about Morgan Freeman tracking down a criminal. Walker, an aspiring writer, based Seven on his experiences of moving from a suburban setting to New York City during a period of rising crime and drug addiction in the late 80s.
I always assumed the city was New York.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people say they thought it was New Orleans. I don't know. I'm kind of with you.
I don't see New Orleans at all.
Yeah, it's a city where it rains a lot.
Yeah.
That's because I think that it's raining in every single episode. He sold the rights to New Line Cinema, and executive producers were opposed to the script's bleak ending and mandated a more mainstream, upbeat outcome. Fincher, who was eager to prove himself after the failure of his first feature film project, Alien 3, read Walker's original script, which he was sent by mistake, and agreed to direct the project, providing the ending remained. So the ending that was written is the ending that we get in the film. Which for a film noir piece, because at the end of a film noir, generally the detective doesn't get away with the cash. They go back to the life as it was before, or they get arrested. It's usually it's not a happy ending. It's either an ending or a sad ending for the detective.
Well, Seven definitely does not have a happy ending.
It does not. It did not do well for test audiences.
It's very gory.
Oh, yeah. And the film, since its release, consensus on the movie has shifted. Seven is now regarded as one of the best thriller, crime, and mystery films ever made, with an incredible twist ending. I will say this. In that film, as creepy as she's in the box, or what's in the box at the end, which we opened that stab with, the creepiest part to me is when they go into the bedroom and it stinks of death and they're examining the victim, and to keep the smell from permeating outside the room, the entire ceiling is covered with
car air fresheners.
Yeah, car air fresheners, the little Christmas tree ones. So it's kind of a surreal scene anyway. And this cop's getting down him, trying to find little pieces of evidence, and the guy breathes. He's not dead. He's just been starved to death. Almost to death. But he looks like a mummy. He has been so messed up. And that cop freaks out and nearly hurts himself trying to get out of the room. It is so visceral and oh my God. And Kevin Spacey in this is so creepy and such a predator. Some of the other things about Kevin Spacey's life kind of make sense now. You know, a horrible thing to say, but yeah, you know. Anywho's.
Did you see, by the way, that Danny Masterson got
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years.
30 years. 30 years in the hole.
Yep.
Well, I mean, again, if he did it, he needs to go down. Same with Spacey. If he did it, he needs to go down. If he didn't do it, you know, let's not kill the guy in the court of public opinion. But clearly he did it, and so did Spacey.
Yeah.
Which makes it hard to separate the performer with the performance, you know? I got a bad taste in my mouth for Woody Allen films, which sucks because I used to love Woody Allen films.
I don't like Woody Allen.
See, I love Woody Allen. He's great. I can't watch his stuff now because of that. I'm kind of that way about Spacey, but oh my God, his performance in Seven was so good. The Usual Suspects, although I'm more enraptured with Gabriel Byrne's performance in that than anything else, because I thought Gabriel Byrne was incredible in that movie.
Yeah, Spacey was brilliant in House of Cards.
Yeah. House of Cards. I liked him better than the original British actor from the 1980s series that they did, the original House of Cards. But yeah, he was just awful in that as an awful human being. So on some of the designs of the buildings and things like that, they wanted to give that state of decay for the city. So a lot of the photography they did was tearing bits of the building down or painting it so it looks like it was falling apart. That was in every single scene of that movie. Nothing is new in Seven. The most light, airy shot in that movie is the very last scene, where there's this wide open space out in the middle of nowhere, which looks like LA, you know, outside of LA, but I guess it was supposed to, but it's got this golden feel at the end of it. And then, you know, the horrible ending scene. You really dug this movie, right?
I did. I like Seven was a great movie.
Oh yeah. It's hard to watch.
Very.
Yeah. But it's definitely one you want to get out and see, and it's a film noir piece. If you have to remember when you're watching Seven, you think it's about Spacey and Brad Pitt and a lesser extent Gwyneth Paltrow. It's not. It's about Morgan Freeman. He's 3 days away from retiring. He is 3 days away from retiring, and it is his last act as a detective. And if you view it through that lens, that movie actually makes a hell of a lot more sense. My last film is Copland. Copland is a film that was slept on by a lot of people. It is a 1997 American neo-noir crime drama film written and directed by James Mangold. It stars an ensemble cast that includes Sylvester Stallone, Harvey Keitel, Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, Peter Berg, Janine Garofalo, Robert Patrick, Michael Rappaport, Annabella Sciorra, Noah Emmerich, and Kathy Moriarty.
Wow.
I know, right? These people could get together and read the phone book, and it would be good. However, this script is really incredible. It's just quiet. But that's the point. And I'll explain why in a minute. Stallone, of course, plays the sheriff of a small New Jersey town who comes into conflict with the corrupt New York City police officers living in the community. The film received positive reviews and grossed $63.7 million on a $15 million budget. So it made its money, but most of the reviews actually weren't positive. This note is correct. Most of the reviews panned this movie as a Martin Scorsese ripoff. It is not. It is not. But it's about this town, Garrison, New Jersey, and it's home to a cadre of police officers from NYPD's 37th Precinct. Lieutenant Ray Donlin, Detective Leo Kransky, and officers Gary Figgis, Jack Rucker, Frank Lagonda, and Joey Randone. Exploiting a loophole in department regulations allowing them to live outside the city by being designated auxiliary transit cops, Donlin and his group are effectively untouchable by NYPD's Internal Affairs Division and are further protected by Sheriff Freddie Heflin. Unable to fulfill his lifelong dream of joining the NYPD due to deafness in one ear after nearly drowning while rescuing a woman years earlier, Heflin idolizes Donlin and refuses to help the Internal Affairs investigator, Lieutenant Mo Tilden, in his attempt to build a case against these dirty cops. One night, Donlin's nephew, Officer Murray Babbage, is sideswiped by two African-American teens while driving across the George Washington Bridge. One of the teens points what looks like a weapon at Babbage just as his tire blows out from a glass puncture. A frightened Babbage shoots them both dead. Donlin, Rucker, and Kransky show up and try to plant a gun on the teen's car, only to get caught by a paramedic. In desperation, Donlin convinces Babbage to fake his suicide before hiding in a garrison, with a promise that he will set him up with a new identity. So, basically, what's going on is these dirty cops are running basically a dirty cop enterprise across the river from New York City. So they can't ever be touched. Because it happened on the bridge, this problem happened on the bridge, and it was a complete happenstance. With the young new officer who they call Superboy, because he graduated at the top of his class. He's in with these people in garrison. He's going to be this great officer, played by Michael Rappaport, by the way. It happens on the bridge, so the IA investigator, played by Robert De Niro, starts investigating and goes to this little local sheriff. This is the local sheriff's not going to turn them in. But there's a couple of cops who are looking like they're going to turn, and Ray Donlin kills them, including Freddie Heflin, the sheriff's best friend, Figsy, played by Ray Liotta. There is a massive shootout, and it's just amazing. Robert Patrick is great in this. Everybody in this movie is incredible. But again, it got slept on. Some of the other people in it, you got Frank Vincent as a PDA president, Vince Lazaro. He also did, I want to say he did, the James Gandolfini show. About
Sopranos?
Sopranos, thank you.
And who is that now?
Frank Vincent.
Frank Vincent.
Yeah, I don't think he was one of the main guys. He was one of the backup guys.
Yes. He was in Sopranos.
Malik Yoba, Arthur Nascarella, Victor Williams, Edie Falco.
Also Sopranos.
Yeah, Mel Goem, Paul Herman, Paul Calderone is Hector, the paramedic. Paul Calderone is great. Paul Calderone, also in Pulp Fiction. My name is Paul. This shit's between y'all. Vincent Laresca, Method Man's in it. Deborah Harry's in it. John Ventimiglia is also he plays a heavy. Tony Chirico as Salvatore Tony.
Also Sopranos, and also a real life mobster.
Yes. Garrison is based on Mancold's hometown of Washingtonville, New York, located about 60 miles from New York City. Mangold grew up at a development called Worley Heights, where many of the residents were current and former NYPD police officers. Stallone gained 40 pounds to portray the beaten-down sheriff of Garrison, The principal shooting location for the film was Edgewater, New Jersey. But yeah, so these cops are all mobbed up, but they don't do any mob business in New York. They do it all in this little town of Garrison, right? There is no mob presence in Garrison because they are the mob there. Mm-hmm. They basically run the town. But when they do deals with mobsters, they do it over here so they can't get caught by NYPD. It's a brilliant idea. And they basically have pulled it off flawlessly for like 20 years until the incident on the bridge. The incident on the bridge is what gets them away. And they were all drunk driving too, by the way. Nobody ever talks about that. The reason that they were swerving all over the road and stuff is because everybody was driving under the influence. Sylvester Stallone crashes a police car while he's drunk driving home. Everybody in this film is a drunk driver, and no one ever makes anything of it. I think that was kind of the idea in making this movie was, okay, this is something that anybody else who wasn't there would get pulled over and ticketed for or arrested or something else. Everybody else in this town gets away with it. So I always found that interesting that they kind of used that as a sort of a template, as sort of an aside. But that is it for Copland. If you've never seen it, and it is readily available right now, if you just type in Copland, you can find it on a couple of different places. You need to see it. Sylvester Stallone is incredible. Harvey Keitel is good. Robert Patrick's good. Everybody in this is good. Even Janine Garofalo as this sheriff's deputy who's kind of over it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, really, really good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for bringing those ones to our attention today. Hopefully they're ones that people will take a look at.
Right on. Well, and again, Somewhere in the Night is in our YouTube playlist in its entirety if you want to check it out.
Cool. All right. Well, then with that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
All right. For today, I got my information off Crime Library, Wikipedia, and the Crime Wire. And this is the story of Gerard John Schaefer Jr.
Gerard John Schaefer Jr.
So Gerard John Schaefer Jr. was an American murderer and suspected serial killer known as the Killer Cop, the Hangman, and the Butcher of Blind Creek. He was convicted in the 1972 murder and mutilation of 2 teenage girls in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and he's suspected to up to 28 further murders.
Holy crap.
Described by prosecutor Robert Stone as, quote, the most sexually deviant person he had ever encountered, Schaefer was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment in his 1973 trial to be served at Florida State Prison. Schaefer became known as the Killer Cop as he was a sheriff's deputy in Martin County, Florida at the time of his initial arrest. He also became known as the Hangman due to his favored practice of binding restrained women to trees with a hangman's noose around their neck prior to their torture and murder. Gerard Schaefer was born in Neenah, Wisconsin on March 25th, 1946, my birthday.
Hey!
The first of 3 children born to Gerard John Schaefer Sr. and Doris Marie Schaefer. His father was a traveling salesman and his mother a housewife. He was raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and later in Atlanta, Georgia, where he attended Marist Academy until his family permanently located to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 1960. Schaefer later described his childhood as troubled and turbulent, largely due to the frequent family relocations, his father's alcoholism, and his father's frequent verbal abuse of his wife and children. Although Schaefer's father's occupation resulted in his being frequently absent from the household, he had a difficult relationship with his oldest son, who resented his frequent belittling of him and believed his father favored his sister over himself and his brother. By contrast, Schaefer was close to his mother, who was extremely protective of her children.
We've heard this before.
Mm-hmm. As a child, Schaefer preferred outdoor pursuits. By his adolescence, he had developed an interest in nature. His primary interests as a teenager including collected guns, hunting, and fishing, activities that he and his father occasionally pursued together when his father was at home. And although hardly a classic loner, classmates at St. Thomas Aquinas High School recalled his not being part of any clique. He frequently pursued his interests alone, leading his family and peers alike to view him as an outdoors man who held aspirations to become a forest ranger. By his teenage years, Schaefer developed erotic fantasies of hurting women who he deemed worthy of his contempt. These fantasies gradually evolved into his developing a penchant for sadomasochism and bondage, and deriving pleasure from inflicting pain upon himself, occasionally as he wore women's underwear, until he achieved orgasm via autoerotic asphyxiation.
Ooh.
Typically, these sadomasochistic rituals involve Schaefer tying himself to a tree in rural locations. These fantasies would increase in terms of frequency and intensity with time, gradually dominating many of his waking hours. When the Schaefers moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 1960, promptly joining the local yacht and country clubs, Gerard Jr. met his girlfriend Cindy at age 14 and saw her steadily for the next 3 years. They were lovers, but Cindy would only perform in scripted scenarios, demanding that Schaefer tear her clothes and rape her each time they had sex. When he balked at continuing the game in 1964, Cindy dumped him. The same day, Schaefer went into the woods and played his bondage games again for the first time since leaving Florida. Schaefer also became a peeping Tom in his mid-teens and is known to have developed the habit of cross-dressing. Although he dated in his high school years, several female classmates viewed him with disdain. One former classmate, Barbara Krolik, later recalled, quote, "I can't remember him being friends with any of the guys. He was always on the outside looking in. As a matter of fact, the only thing I remember is that I always had to tuck my skirt under my legs because Schaefer would practically stand on his head to look up a girl's skirt." Yearbooks from St. Thomas Aquinas High School list Schaefer as a member of the football team in his sophomore and junior years, but no one remembers him playing or joining any other group activity. Classmates recall him as a loner, labeled weird and out of it. In class, he angered the nuns by questioning religious dogma, once writing a long essay scientifically challenging the virgin birth of Christ. Schaefer was, though, considered a promising student by his teachers. Contemporary records reveal that his being a member of the varsity football team during his sophomore-junior years, and he's known to be been an excellent golfer. He graduated from St. Thomas Aquinas School in June of 1964 and briefly worked as a fishing guide in the Everglades before enrolling at Broward Community College. Schaefer initially enrolled as a social studies major at Broward in September of 1964 before switching his focus to teaching, in which he received average grades. Upon completion of his sophomore year at Broward, he applied for and was accepted for scholarship at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, where he began his studies in 1968 with aspirations to obtain a Bachelor of Arts in Education. Next, Schaefer confessed his homicidal urges to his creative writing teacher, who in turn referred him to the college's counselor. Schaefer told Dr. Neil Crispo that he wanted to join the Army because he quote, would like to kill things. I even like to shoot at cows now. There was more to it than simple sniping, though. He had begun to kill livestock, beheading the animals with a machete before he raped their carcasses.
Oh, my God. Well, yep. Also killing animals.
Uh-huh. In December of 1968, Schaefer married his fiancée, Martha Marty Louise Fogg, a fellow FAU student 2 years his junior, whom he'd met at Broward, and with whom he'd briefly toured in her patriotic singing troupe Sing Out 66, which offered an alternative to the contemporary hippie movement. The couple rented a property on Southwest 22nd Street in Fort Lauderdale, although their relationship soon soured, both due to Schaefer's incessant demands for sex and his spending much of his free time hunting. The two divorced on May 2nd, 1970, his wife citing Schaefer's extreme cruelty as the reason for their separation. And shortly thereafter, Schaefer formed a brief relationship with a physically disabled woman whom he encountered at Fort Lauderdale mental health clinic, but the couple soon separated. In March of '69, Schaefer successfully applied for a student teaching internship at Plantation High School. He began this position on September 23rd, primarily teaching geography, but was fired on November 7th for refusing to accept advice from his superiors and continuously attempting to impose his own moral and or political opinions upon his students, which had led the school receiving numerous complaints from parents of his pupils. Shortly thereafter, Schaefer unsuccessfully applied for a student position at Boca Raton Community High School. 4 months later, in March of 1970, Schaefer successfully applied for another teaching internship. This application was accepted, and he began teaching geography at Stranahan High School on April 2nd. Contemporary progress reports indicate Schaefer performed poorly at Stranahan High, with his superiors noting both his arrogance and his very limited knowledge of the subject he taught. 7 weeks after Schaefer commenced this teaching position, the principal of Stranahan High informed him the school's decision to withdraw him from the internship on May 18th, and his career as student teacher formally ended the following day. Shortly after the termination of Schaefer's teaching career, he vacationed in Europe and North Africa before returning to Florida, where he briefly worked for the Wackenhut Corporation as a security guard, as which he pondered as his next career move. On September 1st, 1970, Schaefer applied for a vacancy with the Wilton Manors Police Department. He failed to disclose that he had been twice fired from student teaching positions within the previous year, instead falsely claiming to have required 2 years' experience as a research assistant at FAU and to have recently returned to the U.S. from Morocco. Schaefer's previous work history was not verified, and he was formally inducted into the Broward County Police Department in September 1971, graduating as a patrolman at the end of the year at age 25. In January 1971, 7 months before Schaefer began his career as a police officer, he met a 19-year-old secretary named Teresa Dean while still working as a security guard. The two soon became engaged and married in Fort Lauderdale on September 11th of that year. According to Schaefer, his second marriage was more harmonious than the first. His second wife willingly acquiesced to his frequent demand for sex and also shared his passion for fishing in locations such as the Florida Keys. Schaefer's tenure with the Wilton Manors Police only lasted 6 months. Although he earned a commendation from his superiors on one occasion relating to his conduct during a March 1972 police raid on a drug house, his general performance was considered poor. He was dismissed from his position when his superiors discovered his habit of stopping cars driven by female motorists who had committed minor traffic infractions, then entering their license plate numbers into a database to obtain further personal details about them before contacting them to request dates. Shortly before this dismissal, Schaefer had begun searching for a better-paying law enforcement position elsewhere. He began his service as a deputy with the Martin County Sheriff's Department on June 23, 1972, having forged a letter of recommendation from Wilton Manors endorsing his application. A standard background check revealed he had no criminal record. On the afternoon of July 21, 1972, Schaefer encountered 2 teenage hitchhikers named Nancy Ellen Trotter and Paula Sue Wells, who were 18 and 17 respectively, while on official police duty. He drove the pair to their intended destination of Stewart, although he cautioned the girls against the perils of hitchhiking. Upon learning neither girl was native to Florida and that the two intended to travel to Jensen Beach the following day, Schaefer proposed to drive them to the location. The girls accepted his offer and agreed to meet him at a bandstand on East Ocean Boulevard at 9:15 a.m. The following morning, Schaefer arrived at the bandstand at the prearranged time. On this occasion, he was not wearing his uniform and driving his own vehicle, although he convinced Trotter and Wells that he was still off duty, having switched to plain-clothes undercover duties and thus driving an unmarked vehicle. Shortly after the girls entered the vehicle, Schaefer deviated from their intended route on the pretext of showing the girls an old Spanish fort near Hutchinson Island. En route, he again briefly lectured the girls against accepting lifts from random strangers and the dangers of being sold into white slavery, before stopping the vehicle close to a dilapidated shed deep inside a remote forest where he handcuffed and gagged the girls. He then took one victim to a large cypress tree close to the Indian River, tying her legs to the trunk just below her knees before binding a noose around her neck, which he affixed to a branch in such a manner as to force her to stand on the exposed root to counter the pressure from the noose. Schaefer then took the other victim to another tree a short distance away, where she too was bound in a similar manner, at which she was forced to stand upon a narrow exposed tree root as a makeshift sloping pedestal to counter the pressure from the noose around her neck. Both were informed they were to be raped and murdered. At that moment, Schaefer received an urgent radio dispatch informing him to immediately report to the police station. He left both girls bound and standing upon their pedestals, vowing that he would soon return, and exclaiming to one of his captives, "I gotta go." Both girls were warned to not to try and run away, because I'm not going to be very far down the road, with Schaefer claiming that he was to confer with the individual he intended to sell them to. When Schaefer returned to the forest approximately 2 hours later, he discovered that both girls had escaped. He immediately returned home to call his station, where he informed Sheriff Robert Crowder, quote, "I've done something very foolish. You'll be mad at me." Schaefer then proceeded to explain that he had decided to teach two girls a lesson on the risks of hitchhiking, but overdid the job. He then proceeded to explain he had abandoned the two girls in the general swampland area of Hutchinson Island, not far from the Indian River. Crowder and Lieutenant Melvin Waldron immediately proceeded to Florida State Road A1A, where, close to the highway, they discovered a desperate, partially gagged teenage girl with her hands pinned behind her back, swimming via a flutter kick in a subtropical river. As the officers slowed to a halt, they observed the distraught girl clamber from the riverbank with sections of her jeans and blouse shredded, attempting to gesticulate for their attention. Upon removing the gag from the girl's mouth, the officers heard her identify herself as Nancy, sputtering that her friend was somewhere in the forest. To Trotter's relief, she was informed that a truck driver had discovered Wells staggering to the woodland in the direction towards the highway approximately 45 minutes earlier, and that her friend was already at the police station. Trotter was driven to the station, where she and Wells recounted their ordeal to Crowder. Both girls stated they had managed to escape from their bindings by gingerly writhing against their restraints and loosening their gags with their teeth as they maintained their balance upon the exposed tree roots. Each stated the process of freeing themselves had taken considerable time, and that they had been acutely aware that had they slipped, they would have been hanged. Both girls provided a detailed description of their assailant and his vehicle before formally identifying Schaefer as the individual responsible for their ordeal. Although Schaefer repeated his insistence he had simply overreacted in his effort to demonstrate the dangers of hitchhiking to the two women, his story was not believed. He was dismissed from the force and placed under arrest, with Crowder instructing his officers to file charges of false imprisonment and aggravated assault against him.
In the 70s.
In the 70s.
In the 70s. You know it had to be bad when the chief of police goes, "Yeah, put him in for false imprisonment. There ain't no thin blue line here. That guy's bad."
Right. Approximately 2 weeks, though, after his arrest, Schaefer posted a $15,000 bail, thus meaning he remained at liberty prior to his scheduled November 1972 trial. He returned to the house that he and his second wife rented in Stewart. His wife and in-laws noted no change in his demeanor, believing his claim to have simply been trying to teach the hitchhikers a lesson. As Schaefer awaited trial, he obtained menial employment at a Quick Check. On September 27, 1972, Schaefer abducted two teenage girls named Susan Carol Place, who was 17, and Georgia Marie Jessup, who was 16. The two had encountered Schaefer all while three attended an adult education center in Fort Lauderdale. Schaefer introduced himself to the two girls as Jerry Shepard, claiming to hail from Colorado and stating he intended to return there following a trip to Mexico. He likely feigned interest in Jessup's fascination with the concept of reincarnation and ESP, in addition to Place's love of music, in order to ingratiate himself with both girls and gain their trust. On the afternoon of their disappearance, Place's mother, Lucille, arrived at home to find her daughter straightening her room as Jessup sat upon a chair in the bedroom. Both introduced Lucille to a man in his 20s whom they referred to as Jerry, and Place initially informed her mother that she, Jessup, and Jerry intended to travel from Fort Lauderdale to the beach and play guitar. Although Place's mother remained suspicious, Jerry assured her that his intentions were noble. Nonetheless, she noted the number of his 1969 Datsun. Place confirmed her mother's suspicion that she intended to leave home, although she had tearfully assured her that she would be gone just for a little while and that she would remain in contact. The girls left the Place household with Schaefer at approximately 8:45 p.m. When Place had not returned after 4 days, Lucille first contacted Jessup's mother, Shirley, only to learn her daughter had run away on September 27th, and that she likewise had not heard from either girl since. Both girls were subsequently reported missing to the Oakland Park Police, and Lucille provided investigators with the vehicle registration she had noted, in addition to a physical description of the man the girls had left her home with. The registration was traced to an entirely separate model of vehicle belonging to a St. Petersburg resident who did not resemble Jerry Shepard and who had a firm alibi for the date of the girl's disappearance. The sole Jerry Shepard registered as living in Fort Lauderdale was also eliminated from police inquiries by early 1973, and the teenager's disappearance had largely become a cold case. Mary Alice Briscolina, 14, and Elise Lena Farmer, 13, vanished while hitchhiking to a commercial boulevard restaurant from a Lauderdale-by-the-Sea motel on October 26, 1972, less than 1 month after Place and Jessup were last seen alive. Their bodies were separately recovered in undergrowth close to Sunrise Boulevard, not far from the city of Plantation, early the following year, both with legs spread apart. Briscolina had been extensively beaten about the head, with one blow to her skull proving fatal. Several of her fingernails had also been torn from her body, indicating a ferocious physical struggle with her killer, and Farmer had also been bludgeoned to death. Subsequent questioning of Briscolina's friends revealed she and Farmer frequently visited a Lauderdale-by-the-Sea apartment rented by the older sister of Briscolina's boyfriend, and that an individual these acquaintances recalled as Gary Shepard had been known to Briscolina. This individual, whom several identified as Schaefer, had also claimed to be an ex-Wilton Manors police officer. 3 months later, on January 11, 1973, hitchhikers Colette Marie Goodenow and Barbara Ann Wilcox, both 19, disappeared while hitchhiking from Sioux City, Iowa to Florida. Both were last seen alive in Biloxi, Mississippi. Their disappearances occurred while Schaefer remained free prior to beginning his sentence for the abduction of Trotter and Wells. He is known to have made a long-distance call from Cedar Rapids, Iowa to his Florida residence shortly before Goodenow and Wilcox's disappearance, and may have encountered the two while returning to Florida. Their scattered skeletal remains were discovered close to a large tree in an orange crate in January of 1977. Both victims had been bound together with baling wire, and impressions upon tree branches, coupled with the actual positioning of the orange crate, indicate one or both victims had been suspended from the tree as their murderer sat or stood upon the orange crate. In December of 1972, Schaefer appeared in court in relation to the Trotter and Wells abductions. Due to a plea bargain his attorney strongly recommended he accept, Schaefer was able to plead guilty to just one charge of aggravated assault, for which he received a sentence of 1 year in jail, with the possibility of parole after 6 months to be followed by 3 years probation. Upon passing sentence on December 22nd, Judge D.C. Smith lambasted Schaefer, informing him, quote, "It is beyond the court's imagination to conceive how you were such a foolish and astronomical jackass as you were in this case." He allowed Schaefer's formal sentencing to be postponed until after the holidays, and Schaefer began serving his sentence in Martin County Jail on January 15, 1973. Upon leaving court on December 22nd, Schaefer informed several reporters, quote, "I made a stupid mistake. There was no sex involved. No one was hurt." In March of 1973, Lucille Place discovered a letter penned by Jerry Shepard in her daughter's bedroom. She drove to the return address upon the letter, which was 333 Martin Avenue in Stuart, Florida, only to learn from the building manager that Jerry Shepard had registered at the property under his real name, Gerard Schaefer, and that he was recently sent to jail for the abduction and attempted hanging of 2 girls. As Lucille and her husband Ira drove around the county, she realized investigators had likely incorrectly noted Schaefer's license plate number as being registered in Pinellas County as opposed to Martin County, given the fact that most license plates she observed in Martin County began with 42 and not the 4 of Pinellas County, which investigators had previously informed her was the location of the plate she had provided. Upon relaying this new information to police, Lucille discovered the plate she had noted actually belonged to a blue-green Datsun, registered to one Gerard Schaefer, who resided at 333 Martin Avenue. And when questioned, Schaefer denied ever having encountered Place or her parents, although Lucille positively identified a Wilton Manors personnel photograph of Schaefer as Jerry Shepard. On the afternoon of April 1st, A father and son searching for discarded aluminum cans discovered the extensively decomposed remains of two individuals scattered within and around a hole dug among trees in Oak Hammock Park, Port St. Lucie, Florida. The location of this grave was 212 feet from the nearest dirt road. The grave itself was 2 feet 3 inches deep. Deep scratch marks were evident upon the base of the tree immediately along the grave site, close to where sections of a torso had been bound to the base of a trunk. One victim wore the remnants of blue jeans emblazoned with a circular emblem of the Roadrunner, whereas the other was completely nude and a pile of clothing belonging to the descendants was discovered in nearby undergrowth. Sections of both bodies had been evidently disinterred and scattered by wildlife. The location of the discoveries was approximately 6 miles from where Trotter and Wells had been held captive prior to their escape the previous summer. Both girls had been bound and murdered with their spinal cords severed at the lumbar and cervical section and several bones completely severed with a knife or machete. Their bodies had been decapitated after death, and their jawbones had sustained numerous fractures. One set of remains, later identified as Place, had also sustained a gunshot wound to her lower jaw, consistent with having been inflicted by a .22 caliber pistol. Furthermore, sections of wearing of tree bark among a banyan tree approximately 9 feet from the grave indicated one or both of the victims had been suspended from this tree long enough to leave welt impressions within the bark prior to their deaths, and the initials GJ had been carved into a tree trunk, the root of which bore several deep knife, machete, or an axe incisions containing torn sections of clothing fibers. The bodies were taken to the Dade County Medical Examiner's Office, where Dr. Richard Soveriron formally identified the victims via dental records and healed bone fractures as Place and Jessup on April 5th. Shortly thereafter, Schaefer was informed of the identifications, and he immediately requested the representation of a public defender. The individual appointed to as his legal representative was Elton Schwartz. The location of these discoveries and the descendant identities, plus the similarities in the modus operandi of the method of abduction and murder of Place and Jessup to Schaefer's earlier captivity of Trotter and Wells, led police in Broward County and Martin County to obtain search warrants for Schaefer's house and vehicle, as well as the home of his mother after Place's mother formally identified Schaefer as being the man she had last seen with her daughter and Jessup. Inside a locked bedroom in the Fort Lauderdale residence of Schaefer's mother, police found 300 pages of lurid stories, occasionally accompanied by crude illustrations, that Schaefer had both penned and typed over the course of several years. These stories detailed the kidnapping, humiliation, rape, and execution by hanging of a number of teenage girls and young women who he routinely identified as whores, sluts, and harlots, including two named Belinda and Carmen, and an unidentified woman who he graphically describes as hanging at an unknown location close to Powerline Road. Several of these narratives indicate Schaefer had forced his victims to drink beverages, typically beer or wine, as they stood upon makeshift pedestals with a noose around their necks so that he could observe them urinate prior to their hanging. He had frequently returned to his crime scenes weeks or months after the actual murders in order to commit acts of necrophilia with buried and dismembered bodies, or to extract teeth from the skull. His writings also reveal his fascination with historical methods of torture and execution, and the pleasure he derived from observing acutely distressed females urinate and or defecate prior to and at the time of their actual hanging. Also found at the Fort Lauderdale residence were 11 guns, bags filled with live and spent cartridges, 13 hunting knives, sections of rope, and scores of softcore pornographic magazines, which he had modified to depict nude, urinating women bound with ropes, hanging for trees or other makeshift gallows, or bearing bullet wounds. Other images recovered were 37 black and white Polaroid photographs depicting women being hung and or mutilated, typically within Melaleuca thickets, suspected to be an undergrowth area in Davie, Florida, although the focus of these images was insufficient to permit identification of the subjects. Several other images depicted Schaefer dressed in female garments, simulating his own hanging from a tree with fecal matter smeared across his buttocks. In a letter dated July 20th, 1971, from an individual in Brunswick, Victoria, Australia, whom Schaefer had become acquainted with as the two traveled in Morocco in the 1970s, contained scores of Polaroid images this individual had taken of a village in the Sahara the two had encountered, following what his companion termed as a wog massacre of both Europeans and Arabs. Several of these images depicted women who had been extensively disemboweled and otherwise mutilated with knives and axes. Inside a gold jewelry box, investigators discovered personal possessions such as jewelry, passport, and clothing belonging to several teenage girls and young women. Some of these items, such as a distinctive heart-shaped charm inscribed with the letters MTN, investigators were unable to link to missing or murdered individuals. Others were identified as belonging to young women who had been reported missing in recent years. One gold locket inscribed with the name Lee was determined to belong to a missing woman named Lee Hanlon Bonadies, who had been a neighbor of Schaefer's when both were teenagers and who had been missing since September of 1969.
Oh, wow. So it may go back even further than the early 70s.
Yep. Also recovered was a driver's license belonging to Barbara Ann Wilcox and a passport belonging to Colette Marie Goodenough, both of whom had been reported missing in January of 73. Furthermore, teeth and sections of bone, later identified as belonging to at least 8 victims, were also recovered from the property. The April 6th search of Schaefer's Martin County residence yielded less physical evidence, although investigators did recover 2 human teeth stowed in a plastic capsule inside the master bedroom, several knives and firearms inside a utility shed, and an extensively blood-stained white pillowcase which had evidently been washed. Jessup's distinctive suede purse was discovered to have been in the possession of Schaefer's wife. She later informed police her husband had given her the item as a gift in about November of the previous year, but had attempted to persuade both her and his brother-in-law, Henry Dean, to discard the item upon learning of the April 1st discoveries in Oak Hammock Park, with the explanation the police may use the item to make up some kind of evidence against him. Despite Schaefer's effort, his brother-in-law had given the item to police. By May 12th, investigators had gathered enough physical and circumstantial evidence to link Schaefer to 9 murders and unsolved disappearances dating between 1969 and 1973. The same month, the periodical published a list of 28 murdered or missing individuals believed to be linked to Schaefer. The majority of these individuals hailed from Florida, although 2 victims each hailed from Iowa and West Virginia. At a press conference held on May 14th, Chief Investigator Lem Brumley Jr. informed the media that in terms of scope and bizarreness, the case was the biggest he had encountered in his career to date. On May 18th, Schaefer was formally charged with first-degree murder for the killings of Place and Jessup. He was held without bond pending trial and transferred to the Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee to undergo 30 days of psychiatric examinations before return to St. Lucie County Jail on June 20th. The result of these examinations revealed Schaefer to be an individual suffering from paranoia, psychosis, and acute sexual deviations, who viewed himself as an eliminator of women he deemed immoral, but nonetheless mentally competent to stand trial. At a circuit court hearing on June 21st, District Attorney Robert Stone successfully argued before Judge Cyrus Pfeiffer Trowbridge that Schaefer was sane and thus competent to stand trial. Schaefer vehemently protested his innocence, claiming the accusations against him were a mistake, and informing one reporter he remained confident he would be exonerated. Schaefer was brought to trial on September 17, 1973, and he was tried in the St. Lucie County before Judge Trowbridge. The prosecution team consisted of Stone and Philip Shaler, assisted by Richard Purdy and Anthony Young. Schaefer was defended by Schwartz and Bruce Colton, assisted by James Brecker. As the murders of Place and Jessup had been committed at the time when the Supreme Court of Florida had declared capital punishment unconstitutional in the state, prosecutors sought life imprisonment for Schaefer. He pleaded not guilty to the charges against him and frequently conveyed a disdain and aloof demeanor throughout the official proceedings, often staring coldly at prosecution witnesses as they testified, or turning to smile at members of the press when a witness testified for his counsel. Following the closing arguments, the jury began their deliberations at 3:45 p.m. They deliberated for 5 hours and 10 minutes before returning with 2 verdicts of first-degree murder, which Judge Trowbridge formally announced to the court at 11:05 p.m. Upon receipt of this verdict, Schaefer proclaimed his innocence, stating in a reporter, quote, "That's the roll of the dice. I had a good defense, but I'm innocent." Closing arguments to determine the sentence Schaefer should receive began on October 3rd and saw the defense argue he should be involuntarily institutionalized under the 1971 Baker Act, in contrast to the prosecution's argument of life imprisonment to be served in Florida State Prison. The following day, Schaefer was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of life imprisonment. When asked if he had anything to say prior to sentencing, Schaefer proclaimed his innocence before requesting he be sent to a psychiatric hospital as opposed to prison. Contemporary statutes indicated the possibility of parole for Schaefer after he had served between 14 and 19 years of imprisonment, although his presumptive parole release date was revised in 1973 to indicate the likelihood of parole in 2016. Schaefer appealed his conviction, contending he had never been indicted by a grand jury and thus requesting a new trial, but this appeal was rejected in June of 74. In the years following his conviction, Schaefer maintained his innocence in the Place and Jessup murders and denied his culpability in any others, insisting he was framed by what he termed overzealous prosecutors, corrupt law enforcement personnel, and his own defense attorney, Elton Schwartz, who ultimately married Schaefer's second wife on December 21st, 1973. Although maintaining his innocence and claiming to have never met either girl, Schaefer frequently and falsely described Place and Jessup as heroin users, police informants, and promiscuous, and he was also known to have insulted their parents. While incarcerated, Schaefer developed a reputation amongst his fellow inmates as aloof and imperious individual who many suspected of being an informant in an effort to earn privileges from authorities. In the early years of his confinement, he was placed in solitary confinement for prison mail violations on more than one occasion, occasionally for attempting to persuade members of the public to mail him female undergarments. He spent much of his time devoted to correspondence in what he termed a new writing genre called killer fiction. Schaefer described this genre as one which does not glorify violence, but enables the reader to see the acts of murder and necrophilia in stark reality. Although he claimed these writings were fictional, several investigators believe many of these writings incorporate his own murders and assaults. While not scamming, quote, freaks, Schaefer worked as a jailhouse lawyer with a twist. While writing briefs for fellow cons, he milked his clients for information on their cases and sold them out to authorities. One such inmate awaiting trial for murder told Schaefer where his victim's body could be found, and Schaefer relayed the directions to the police, landing his client on death row. It was a deadly game, perhaps the extension of his childhood death wish, and he played it recklessly as if he were invulnerable. Another sometime confidant of Schaefer's was self-described cannibal Otis Toole, which we will cover at some point. Sentenced to life for 6 murders, Toole was suspected of many more, most notably the 1981 kidnap slaying of young Adam Walsh. By 1988, when he met Schaefer, Toole had several times confessed to Walsh's murder, always recanting his statements when detectives asked for proof. Schaefer wrote to Adam's father, who was John Walsh, host of America's Most Wanted, posing as Toole, demanding $50,000 for Adam's remains, quote, so you can get them buried all decent and Christian. Walsh ignored the offer, and Toole soon soured on Schaefer's mercenary attentions. And aside from the sadistic pleasure of tormenting Adam's parents, Schaefer gained nothing from the episode except a new addendum to his reputation as a snitch. In 1983, Schaefer was transferred to the Avon Park Correctional Institution. Here, he assisted authorities in obtaining sufficient evidence to secure the conviction of pedophile Mervyn Eric Cross, who had been discreetly operating in an international softcore child pornography operation while incarcerated. The information Schaefer provided also resulted in the arrest and conviction of 2 individuals in Seattle and Los Angeles, one a school teacher, the seizure of thousands of indecent images of children across 4 states, and Cross being transferred to Florida State Prison and placed in solitary confinement with his mail closely monitored. Schaefer himself was returned to Florida State Prison in August 1985. Sandra London, who had been Schaefer's girlfriend in high school shortly prior to his 1964 graduation, interviewed Schaefer at length following his conviction. She gradually served as his co-author in his writing genre, later publishing a compilation of his short stories and drawings entitled Killer Fiction in 1990. A second book, Beyond Killer Fiction, followed 2 years later, and the stories within Killer Fiction and Beyond Killer Fiction typically involve the savage, graphic torture, mutilation of murder of young women, usually penned from the perspective of the killer, who is often a rogue police officer. Schaefer remained adamant the stories he authored were pure fiction, that he had actually begun writing stories of this nature in the 1960s, having been inspired to do so after watching Herschel Gordon Lewis's splatter movie Blood Feast. However, police and prosecutors viewed the content as thinly veiled descriptions of his actual crimes, and in private letters to his attorneys, Schaefer admitted these speculations were true, claiming one story, Murder Demon, specifically recounts the murders of Briscolina and Farmer.
Yeah, don't blame your shit on Herschel Gordon Lewis. He's a genius.
Excuse me. A revised edition of Killer Fiction published after Schaefer's death included numerous stories and rambling articles from the first two books and a collection of letters to London, in which Schaefer claimed to be responsible for the murders of scores of women and girls. He also claimed that fellow serial killer inmate Ted Bundy, who he labeled a tyro by comparison to himself, both admired and envied him. He also accused Bundy of playing at copycat, recording his own crimes. London noted at the time that Schaefer was corresponding with her. He was publicly proclaiming his innocence and threatening to sue anyone who labeled him a serial killer. In one letter, Schaefer claimed to have begun murdering women in 1965 when he was age 19. In another, he claimed to be responsible for the December 1969 disappearance of two schoolgirls, 9-year-old Peggy Ron and 8-year-old Wendy Stevenson, who he claimed to have kidnapped from Pompano Beach and cannibalized. Publicly, Schaefer had denied any involvement. In a letter from Schaefer to London, he said, "When I nabbed Jessup in place, I had been in the ghoul game for almost 10 years, so I knew what to expect from these juicy young creatures at the end. Doing doubles is far more difficult than doing singles, but on the other hand, it puts one in a position to have twice as much fun. These can be some lively discussions about which some of the victims will get to be killed first. When you have a pair of lively teenage bimbalinas bound hand and foot and ready for a session with the skinning knife, neither one of the little devils wants to be the one to go first, and they don't mind telling you quickly why their best friend should be the one to die."
Oh.
London ended her collaboration with Schaefer in 1991, shortly after publishing repudiating his claims that he was merely a framed ex-cop who wrote lurid fiction. Upon hearing he had been publicly rebuked by London, Schaefer allegedly repeatedly threatened her life. On the many frivolous lawsuits he filed was directed at her for publicly referring to him as serial killer in print format. In support of London's defense against the lawsuit, she compiled an exhibit of photocopies of 500 incriminating pages of Schaefer's handwritten correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
The judge immediately dismissed Schaefer's lawsuit. His aforementioned lawsuits against Newton and Wilson were likewise dismissed after London provided copies of the 500-page exhibit to them. His lawsuit against Kendrick was still ongoing at the time of Schaefer's 1995 murder. On December 3rd, 1995, Schaefer was stabbed to death on the floor of his cell. He had been stabbed over 40 times about the face, head, neck, and body, and his throat also being slashed. His right eye destroyed and several ribs fractured. His body was discovered after a fellow inmate informed staff of his death. According to prison officials and prosecutors, a 32-year-old fellow inmate named Vincent Faustino Rivera had killed Schaefer following an argument over who received the final cup of hot water from a dispenser days prior to his murder. Rivera was convicted of Schaefer's murder in 1999. He received 53 years and 10 months imprisonment added to his sentence of life plus 20 he was already serving for a double homicide committed in Tampa in 1990. Rivera never confessed to the crime nor gave any motive for the murder. It is suspected Schaefer was killed for being a present informant, as in the year prior to his murder, other inmates had repeatedly thrown human waste at him and twice set his cell on fire. Reportedly, Schaefer's classification officer confirmed that he was murdered in a direct response to his leaking confidential information to authorities pertaining to a well-respected and powerful inmate. There's really no consensus on when or where Schaefer began his killing. As Schaefer himself was killed in prison in 1995, the true number of victims he had claimed will never be known. While incarcerated, he frequently encouraged speculation as to how many victims he had claimed, while simultaneously denying he had ever committed murder and claiming the numerous writings discovered at his mother's residence were purely fictional. Author Patrick Kendrick believes the most likely year Schaefer began killings is 1969, and that his true victim count stands around 11, although the commonly held belief is that he may have claimed up to 28 victims. The initial list of 28 potential victims was first published in a Florida periodical in the spring of 1973, although this list, which also includes 7 males whose personal artifacts were recovered at his mother's home, contains the name of several individuals later to have discovered to have been alive at the time of his arrest or have died at a later date. For example, one of the young women on this compiled list, 14-year-old Katrina Marie Bivens, who was reported missing in January 1970, was located alive in June of the same year, whereas one of the males on the list, Michael Angeline, died in a plane crash in 1981. October 2nd, 1966, there was Nancy Elaine Leichner and Pamela Ann Nader, who were 21 and 20. They were last seen alive hiking in the Alexander Springs Wilderness Recreation Area of the Ocala National Forest. Although authorities initially believed the two had drowned while swimming, this theory was ultimately disproven, and Schaefer later confessed to their murders. September 8, 1969, Lee Farrell Handline Bonadies, 24, a newlywed waitress who had known Schaefer since both were teenagers. She is last known to have left a note to her husband of 2 weeks indicating she intended to drive to Miami but would return home that evening. Schaefer later claimed to a private investigator that Bonadies had phoned him on the date of her disappearance asking for a ride to Miami International Airport but never called him back. Her skull, bearing 3 bullet holes, was discovered at a construction site in Palm Beach County in April of 1978. Her jewelry was found at Doris Schaefer's house in 1973, and that was Gerard's mother. Mm-hmm. On December 18, 1969, Carmen Marie Halleck, who was 22, disappeared after informing her sister she had an appointment with a male teacher from Broward Community College who may be able to provide her with a government job. She was last seen wearing a black chiffon dress, and one of the stories Schaefer is known to have penned prior to his arrest recounts the hanging and mutilation of a girl with auburn hair wearing a black chiffon dress. 2 of Halleck's teeth and a gold shamrock pin belonging to her were found at Schaefer's home. December 29, 1969, Peggy Ron and Wendy Stevenson, last seen by relatives at Pompano Beach, walking towards a parking lot to purchase ice cream cones. Their bodies have never been found. Schaefer denied the slayings publicly, but later confessed in a letter dated April 19, 1989, quote, "I am annoyed by all this murder talk. Quote, Peggy and Wendy just happened along at the time I was curious about 1930s cannibal Albert Fish's craving for flesh of young girls. I assure you these girls were not molested sexually. I found them both very satisfactory, particularly with sautéed onions and peppers." Ugh. Several investigators dispute the authenticity of the confession, as the individual last known to have seen the girls alive had observed both girls still clad in their bathing suits in the company of a man whose physical description markedly contrasted with Schaefer's. January 18, 1970, Merritt Ellen Mallory, 19, and Karen Lynn Farrell, 18, 2 West Virginia University students last seen alive leaving a theater in Morgantown, West Virginia. Their decapitated bodies were discovered on April 16th. An inmate with an extensive history of providing false confessions provided a 35-page confession, rife with errors, confessing to their murders in 1976, and the validity of his confession is disputed. The evidence linking Schaefer to their murders is circumstantial, but he was formally cleared as a suspect in 1982. January 4th, 1972, 22-year-old Belinda Hutchins was a married cocktail waitress with a 10-month-old daughter who worked as a high-class call girl. Hutchins is known to have briefly dated Schaefer shortly after his application to serve with the Broward County Police Department. She was last seen entering a blue Datsun parked outside of her home, and police later recovered an address book identified as belonging to Hutchins and containing the name Jerry Shepard from Schaefer's home. February 29th, 1972, Deborah Sue Lowe, 13 years old, was last seen walking towards Rickards Middle School. Her school books were later discovered in a trash bin 1 block from her home, and her body has never been found. Lowe's family strongly believes Schaefer, who worked with her father and previously visited the Lowe's household, was involved in her disappearance. March 19th, 1972, Bonnie Taylor, 20, was a Wilton Manors resident whom Schaefer is known to have stopped for a speeding violation shortly after her March 1972 disappearance, but no further evidence on this case exists. August 11th, 1972, Leonard Joseph Massar, 46, was a coffee shop proprietor who was last seen at Riviera Beach, Florida bar. His handless body was discovered buried on Hutchinson Island on January 3rd, 1973, close to where Schaefer had bound and threatened Trotter and Wells. No direct evidence exists to indicate Schaefer's culpability in this murder or the murder of any male. However, Schaefer is known to have referenced Massar's murder in correspondence following his murder's conviction. October 26, 1972, Mary Alice Briscolina and Elise Lena Farmer, who we just talked about earlier, disappeared while hitchhiking to a restaurant. Their decapitated bodies were found by construction workers buried 600 feet apart on January 17th and February 15th, 1973, respectively. A distinctive gold chain and Madonna medal belonging to Briscolina were later found in Schaefer's jewelry box. December 23rd, 1972, Suzanne Gale Poole, 15 years old, was a Fort Lauderdale teenager reported missing by her family shortly before Christmas 1972. Her partial skeletal remains were discovered on June 16, 1974, bound to a mangrove tree in a swampland district of Singer Island. The remains were identified in May 2022 via genetic genealogy. The circumstance of her disappearance and murder led authorities to believe she may have been a victim of Schaefer, who had been temporarily freed from court one day before the estimated date of Poole's disappearance. And last January 11, 1973, Colette Marie Goodnow and Barbara Ann Wilcox both disappeared while hitchhiking from Sioux City to Florida, just days before Schaefer began serving his jail sentence for the abduction of Trotter and Wells. Personal property identified to belong to both women were later recovered in Schaefer's home. Their bound bodies were discovered along a bank canal in St. Louis County in January of 1977, and both victims were formally identified via dental records on January 8, 1978. The upper portion of Goodnow's skull was never found.
Oof.
And that is the terrible tale of Gerard John Schaefer Jr.
Yeah, this guy's awful.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he got done in because he was a snitch, not because he was a murderer.
That's what I would expect. He was pretty well known for it. So, well, thanks for taking that journey with me.
Well, thank you, sir.
I appreciate it. I know that was a long one. So, hope everybody was able to stick through it or took a break like we had to.
Yeah, we did actually have to take a break. Had to hit the can.
Yes. Awesome. Well, we appreciate everybody for joining us for another week of Nerdery and Murdery. We appreciate all of our listeners, those sticking through with us. As always, you can find more information about us on nerderyandmurdery.com. That's the hub for everything about us, links to everything we talk about, pictures, as well as videos that Zig likes to post.
Yes, we do. We have started producing basically YouTube videos of everything we do now. So, and of course, we always get the playlist that generally, when the episode premieres, that video will be in the playlist. But you can go look at the playlist beforehand as well.
Awesome. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, sir.
You can also find the link to our merchandise page where if you wish to show off your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing some of that. It does go to help with the cost of the show, as well as our Patreon, which if you wish to donate to the show, help us keep going with it. We do appreciate that. There are costs that are involved with keeping the show on the air, the websites, the keeping everything on Buzzsprout and Squarespace and everything like that. So do consider becoming a patron. We really do appreciate each and every one of you. Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find us, and when they're looking for stuff that we're covering. So with that, at the end of another week,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.